Hello, everyone. My name is Zain Asher. I'm an anchor at CNN International. It is such an honor to be here because I'm a big believer in the goals of Mission 300, especially when it comes to lifting millions of my fellow Africans out of poverty. I do want to start by thanking the government of Tanzania for putting on this summit, the World Bank, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the African Development Bank. So Mission 300's goals are crucial in terms of addressing a large portion of the energy gap that exists on the continent and investing in the right forms of energy infrastructure to transform the lives of millions of people. I think it's really important to start by underscoring the scale of the challenge before us, because we're talking about 600 million Africans who do not have access to power right now. Think about that number, 600 million. What does that mean? When you're talking about those kinds of numbers in terms of people who don't have access to power, that stifles economic growth, that limits access to educational opportunities, it compromises healthcare, the list goes on. So when we're talking about addressing these needs, this is not just a moral imperative, it is crucial in terms of unlocking Africa's vast potential. And so I do want to start by talking to Ajay Banga, president of the World Bank, about this. Mission 300's goals. Obviously, it was established last year. It's still in its early stages. It's still in terms of planning, partnership, initial project implementations. Just walk us through what has been specifically achieved since it started last year.
Yeah, so thanks. And Zain, let me add my thanks to the government of Tanzania, not only for hosting us, but also in the manner in which they've been executing access to electricity increase in their own country over the past few years. They've made enormous progress, and that's kind of a lighthouse and a beacon for others to follow as well, although they're ambitious to do even more in the coming period. So congratulations. So the objective of this conference is to bring together the work of the past few months, where 12 countries have created an energy compact. And what does that mean? That means everything ranging from trying to understand, first of all, what's required to get access to electricity. 300 million out of 600 billion people is what we want to reach. That's not a small number. It's a hard goal. It's an achievable goal. It's going to take much work. And in the past, the biggest challenge has been the absence of all hands coming together to play. One part of that hand is the regulatory policy that is required to make it clear and transparent both to development banks as well as private sector players that putting your money to work in this sector will lead to predictable outcomes. The moment you create unpredictability in that regulatory policy framework, you lead people with the decision that says, I'll take my money and go play elsewhere. That has to change. And that is the fundamental basis of the new compacts. So predictability on tariffs, predictability on land acquisition, predictability on all the things that are required for this investment to be stable. That's the compacts. The second part of the compact is to do with how do we get to understand what is required, not just for generation, but for connections to happen. So for example, we were using geospatial mapping to figure out every household in a country, and then figure out whether it'll be easier to connect it to the national grid, the way the minister was describing how they're connecting people to the national grid. Or is it in some cases cheaper, quicker, faster to connect them to distributed energy, solar and other renewables, and that's a mix that's required. That's the second big work, kind of like the infrastructure of getting this done. The third part of this then says, so now where do we get the money from? Because the financing you need is both on behalf of the development banks and governments and the private sector. We've actually brought the IMF in as well with their RST to enable governments to be able to create the fiscal headroom that they will need to create to make utilities profitable, utilities capable of meeting their demands. So there's a series of partners in this idea of regulatory policy clarity, infrastructure and connectivity, and then the financing required. Those three kinds of verticals are where all the work has gone over this last period. And just to add into it, the last piece is the regional electrical markets that we're trying to create. So Tanzania spoke to their being part of 4 already, trying to get to a 5th. This is something we need across the continent. And that's the work that's going on.
Thank you, Ajay, for laying that out. Raj, let me bring you in because I want to expand on something that Ajay said, and that is this idea that, there have been challenges in the past. This is not the first time that we've seen this kind of summit with majorly lofty goals, right? And in the past, a lot of them have failed to get off the ground because of regulation, policy, the private sector, being sort of skeptical. Walk us through what's different this time when it comes to Mission 300.
Well, thank you, Zain, for your leadership and for your opening as well. And extraordinary gratitude and thanks to both Ajay and Akin for the leadership they and their institutions all the way through the teams have shown to bring us to this point. You're right. The world should ask itself, does this summit in Tanzania matter? Will it deliver something that has a chance to be wildly successful? Frankly, at a time when a lot of global politics has moved towards a more inward and populist focus around our planet. And I am extremely confident that the answer to that question is yes. And there are three core reasons why. The first is, we all know, everyone in this room knows, in order to have any chance of being successful, this effort has to be African-led at absolutely every level. And the fact that nearly 30, more than 24 African heads of state are coming here, are issuing the compacts that Ajay just described, are signing a declaration, have detailed the policy and regulatory reforms that they are saying they're going to put into place, and have created a framework for the private sector to see some regulatory and policy clarity in the next years, is an extraordinary initial achievement, and is frankly, without that, we might as well all go home, right? So that's the first reason. The second is happened in May. I mean, the fact that Ajay and Akin took these two extraordinarily important global financing institutions and said, our number one priority on the continent is going to be electrification, that we're putting $30 billion behind it. Then we had a successful IDA replenishment round that makes most of that capital actually available, gives us all confidence that at a time when I think most sub-Saharan African countries are spending more on debt service repayment than they are on health and education, that the capital will be there to support public investment. And let me just remind everyone here, no country on the planet has achieved universal electrification without significant public investment, not one. So that is the second reason why this has a chance to be successful. The third is what I heard yesterday from the more than 200 private sector CEOs, investors, partners, grid developers, and entrepreneurs that are present at this summit. The ingenuity, the technology, the business models, the willingness to take risks, and the sheer capacity for leadership in that private sector community is mission critical to success. And I told that group yesterday that the goal of this summit is to actually create the policy and political and public sector framework to allow the private sector to shine and to thrive. And I think those three elements coming together in what is the largest public-private philanthropic partnership designed to create jobs, hope, and opportunity at a time otherwise of political dislocation is uniquely important, and we owe it to each of us in this room to ensure that this project succeeds.
Raj, thank you for that. I loved what you said about the importance of this being African-led, because obviously we are going to be hearing from a number of African heads of state tomorrow. And Dr. Adesina, talk to us about how important that is, that it's African-led, that we have the buy-in from African heads of states, and just give us a sense of how the African Development Bank is working with several African heads of states to really ensure that Mission 300 is a success.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Zainab. You heard from Ajay and also from Raj. And I want to first start by thanking Her Excellency President Suluhu Hassan here for hosting us in this beautiful country of Tanzania. And I also want to thank every single one of you for showing up here from around the world to what is a global mission to make sure that Africa has electricity to power itself. You were listening to Ajay and I, our comments on the video. This is mission critical. This is a continent that actually loses 3 to 4% of its GDP every year because of lack of electricity. This is a place where we have 571 million Africans without access to electricity. Talk less of whether it is reliable and affordable and accessible electricity, as Ajay was mentioning. This is a continent that accounts for 83% of all the 685 million people in the world. And the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations is here. And we are all driving with UN Secretary General to achieve SDG 7. So our mission here is to say we need everybody. We need the heads of state, and they are going to be here and talk about in a moment. We need the private sector. We need the multilateral development banks. We need the civil society. We need all of us working to do that. You know, we are not just sitting here representing big institutions about money. It's not about us. It's about those that are not here. It's about those people who are small, medium-sized enterprises that are trying to just simply have access to electricity, small and medium-sized businesses to run our economies. That's it. It's the people that are not here. And we must listen and hear and feel their needs and make sure that this summit is an action-driven summit. Ajay laid it out very clearly. When he and I started this, we said, look, we can't do Mickey Mouse business. We can have a situation where Africa doesn't have enough electricity. And so we set up this unprecedented partnership to do it, which is called Mission 300. And we are not alone. Raj is here. He joined us to do that. We have UN Secretary General here. Damilola is here from Sustainable Energy for All. We have the Global Energy Partnership for People and for the Planet. We have UN Secretary General. We have my dear friends here, President of Islamic Development Bank, you know, Jabbar. We have Linjikan here. It's a partnership that will scale, that will transform. So for the heads of state that are going to be here, as you said for your question, what exactly are we going to do? First and foremost is their countries. So it's got to be country-led actions that actually shows that they are going to deliver electricity to their people. And secondly is that being their country, they have to increase the budget from their own fiscal budget to support infrastructure, power generation, power transmission, power distribution. They are the ones that are going to make sure that they feel the last mile connectivity there to make sure that people actually have access to electricity. Ajay was talking about the whole issue of reforms in his comment. Yes, the utilities have to be reformed. They have to reduce their technical and financial losses. We have to make sure that we have good independent utilities, procurement systems that are transparent, that are competitive. We've got to make sure that we're looking at least cost basis of generating and transmitting energy. We've got to make sure, Ajay mentioned the whole issue of regional distribution. It's not just each country, it's regional transmission lines that make sure the regional power pools are working. So those are the kind of things that they have to do. And two things we are expecting from this particular summit is that the energy compact for each of the countries will be signed. We have 13 countries that are going to be part of that, and that will allow us to do 145 million people with access to electricity by 2030. Secondly, it's the declaration, which is the declaration of the summit, which all the heads of state will sign to show that the time has come for us to deliver on this. So all I'm trying to say is that if you want to deal with a big problem, it's not about the flag of the African Development Bank or the flag of the World Bank or of anybody else. We have the president of COP here, Babayev here, to tell you the global partnership here. It's not about what we plant. It's about how we work together. So this is all about working together. This is all about joining hands. This is all about pooling resources. And this is all about accountability. Because at the end of the day, you asked Raj the question, what's different? This is not a talking summit. At the end of the day, it's not what we say. We can do megawatts of talk all we want. It's going to be the megawatts of power that we deliver that actually matter. So it's an action-driven summit. And I want to thank you, all that are here today, for joining us in this to make sure that we can have Africa develop with pride, because you cannot develop in the dark. And we are determined it's time for Africa to solve this particular issue. Together, we can do exactly that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adesina. Ajay, as Dr. Adesina said, talk is cheap, right? This is an action-driven summit. What do you think are the sort of ideal outcomes over the next 2 days? What do you want to happen come this time tomorrow or by end of business tomorrow?
So, I can just summarize a lot of that. We're going to get these declarations, we're going to get the compacts from these countries, but what we need to do is the next phase of countries that have to have their energy compacts done. We need them to be finalized over the coming days, because this is only the first 12. The idea is not to exclude anybody else. It's phasing. There's only so much we can do of geospatial mapping, financial calculations, policy change. You got to do it in some phasing. The second piece is that there are a lot of people here from other multilateral development banks. We talked about the Islamic Development Bank and AIIB, but there's also development banks and others, commercial banks here, who will get a chance today to listen to these compacts and make sure that they can go back to their clients and represent with accuracy why this is an opportunity that should not be missed. That's the second. The energizing of the network, so to say, has got to happen. No puns intended on energy or network. That's the idea. And then the third part we've got to get here is that the private sector has got to get the faith and trust that this is real and serious. So let me just add one thought to that. The World Bank is going to be putting somewhere between $30 to $40 billion to work in this effort over the coming years. And the idea of putting so much of our IDA money, we had a very good IDA replenishment, which is part of this exercise. But the idea of putting so much of our money to work here is also to enable and make sure that these policy reforms that are being committed by governments actually get enacted. We will pay for results. We're not going to put the money up front and say, we trust that you will get the policy reforms made. We're going to give you the money to enable you to create the headroom that you need as a country to make that policy reform happen. And it's the same idea of working with the IMF to enable the RST dollars to be available to these countries to create the fiscal headroom. This is putting our money where our mouth is. Mm-hmm. And I would say that's going to be a very critical part of what has to happen over these coming 2 days. Then for a second, you've got to step back from all this and think about why are we doing this? Because otherwise we're going to get caught with the aspect of the tyranny of the small idea here, of this compact and that compact. The real reason we're doing all this is because we have a demographic boom on this continent. Young people are coming of age and they want a job. A job is not just a ticket out of poverty, it is a ticket into dignity. And a job is a state of mind. Poverty is not just a state of being, it destroys your mind. And that's what jobs do for people. You cannot have jobs without electricity. Electricity is a human right. It gives you energy to do what you need for education, healthcare, skilling, enabling of jobs, digitization. When people talk about digitizing Africa, one of the things we're planning to do during this exercise is to put cell phone towers into all the locations where we put up distributed solar energy, or connect to satellites. Starlink, for example, can enable a lot to happen with digital connectivity. If we can connect 300 million people over the coming years, not just to electricity, but also to digital access, we can transform Africa's potential for jobs for young people over the coming decade. That's what we are here for. The idea of these 2 days is to excite everybody in this audience of that vision and make sure they can trust that we are putting our money where our mouth is, and this is not empty talk. That's the real objective of these 2 days.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's such an important point to underscore, that this is not just about power in and of itself. There's obviously a trickle-down effect when it comes to improving electricity access for 300 million people, especially when it comes to economic growth and job creation. Dr. Adesina, when it comes to the private sector, these projects need to be bankable, right? There has to be a return on investment. Just give us a sense of what the private sector is looking to get out of this when it comes to getting a return.
Thank you very much. I think here at this summit, we have a lot of CEOs, we have a lot of developers, project developers that are here, with a lot of financial institutions that are here. Because to actually achieve what we want to do requires more than public sector money, it requires a lot of private sector. So whether you're investing in private sector that are actually doing mini grids, which is they're going to be very critical for us to get access to those in the underserved areas. There's a lot of work in the mini grids and also in terms of the solar PV systems and all of those things pay as you go. The private sector do most of those areas. But the challenges facing the private sector first and foremost includes first the regulatory environment again. How do you make sure that if you are doing a procurement system, that procurement system for your least cost energy supply system or expansion system is transparent and that it is competitive. And second is that the cost of capital. If you look at Africa today, the cost of capital is probably 3 to 4 times higher than other parts of the world. So the upfront capital cost of doing that is quite a lot. And so here is an area where we can play, and we are already playing, all of us, a big role. And so take, for example, the whole issue of concessional financing. Ajay was mentioning, or you mentioned, the case of the IDA 21 replenishment. And Ajay, congratulations on that. Great job by you and all of your teams for that. We have also the African Development Fund 17 replenishment that is coming up that we are trying to raise $25 billion. And that will be concessional financing to be able to do a lot more. But beyond that, you also have to look at how do you reduce the risk facing many of the private sector. So whether you're using partial risk guarantees or your partial credit guarantees to buy down the risk and so on, which we do tremendously well. All of us do that very, very well. We have the instruments to do that. But coming back to the issue of who are we doing this for, you can invest in grid system that gets into rural areas. First and foremost, let me thank and congratulate Tanzania and Our Excellency President Suluhu here. This country where we are in, they have grid access to all 100% of their villages in this country. That's remarkable for a country. And so at the end of the day, that last mile connectivity is important. And so Russia, from Rockefeller Foundations, all the other partners need to have also access to grants. Because the grant is what you use. You have your tariff structure. This is your cost-reflective tariff. And you have also the mandated tariff that governments have to do. Well, somebody has to buy down that cost. And a lot of the time, that can only be done by grant support for many of the countries. And that's included in what we are trying to do. And finally, when it comes to the issue of private sector, it's just the bankability of the projects. Where are the bankable projects? We at African Development Bank, we support the NEPAD infrastructure development project. We also have Africa 50. I happen to chair the board of Africa 50, doing a tremendous job in developing the bankable projects. Rockefeller Foundation, Sustainable Energy for all of them, they help in developing bankable projects. We have to have the bankable projects. And the last thing I would say about this is all the private sector work that's going on in the energy sector today in Africa will depend on three critical things. One, are the tariffs reflective of the cost? So in other words, you must have transparent, cost-reflective tariffs so they can actually get their money back. The second thing that we have to do is to make sure that the access to capital for those private sector is not just short-term. They need long-term, low-interest capital to be able to do it. And finally, because of the connectivity issue via mini grids, which a lot of Sustainable Energy for All and everybody is doing an R7 World Bank, we have to make sure that we support these new IPPs, the independent power producers, to have access to capital to do the mini grids and the microgrids that are required to do that. We have ISC here, and you will be hearing from my brother, Mark Tajep, later on about a panel about how we are doing this. We need the private sector, but we know that we can do a lot. And last thing, Ajay mentioned IMF, and I'm looking for the IMF Deputy Managing Director. It's not here. We as multilateral development banks, led by the African Development Bank and Inter-American Development Bank, and with support of UN Secretary General and DSG Amina Mohammed, I've worked with IMF on the special drawing rights. Those special drawing rights, we as multilateral development banks can leverage those things by up to 8 times. So a $20 billion allocation will become $160 billion. that we can provide low-interest, long-term financing to support and buy down the risk facing the private sector. So I think all I'm trying to say is that the private sector is critical, but they need government to do the right thing. They need us to buy down their risk, and they need certainty of the policy environment to bring in the capital investments needed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adesina. So, Raj, let me bring you in. Obviously, Dr. Adesina talked about the importance of the private sector, but he also talked about the importance of grants as well. Give us a sense from you at the Rockefeller Foundation how important philanthropic capital is to de-risk investment and actually catalyze greater involvement from the private sector.
Well, maybe I'll answer that question from the perspective of the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, which is actually a collaborative philanthropic effort of which the Rockefeller Foundation is one part, but the Bezos Earth Fund, the IKEA Foundation, the Children's Investment Fund, MasterCard, Gates, are all collaborating to say, let's try to work together. The reason that's important is because, if we're being honest, I think we have to recognize that there is not nearly enough philanthropic capital to matter at all. The only reason philanthropy should even be a part of this is if we can move quickly, if we can take unique risks that others can't take, and if we can do it in a collaborative way. And so, since Ajay and Akin made their announcement in May between GAP and the Rockefeller Foundation, we've already committed out, I think, $65 million. Not a lot of money relative to the needs here, but being able to move quickly in specific ways that are responsive to the team at the World Bank, to the team at the African Development Bank, and most importantly to the countries themselves, just helps move quickly on things. And my plea or request to other philanthropic partners, I think 8 to 10 major philanthropies are represented at this summit, is please join us. Join us to get behind the ideas and the initiatives and the compacts that the leaders are signing tomorrow and that Ajay and Akin and their teams have been advocating for. We can really only be successful if we are willing to work together. And let me just say 2 other quick things. Everyone has to behave and operate differently for this project to work. So the World Bank team and the African Development Bank team have had to be and have been open and collaborative and willing to try to do things in a different way in order to allow in the private sector and private philanthropy, and for that we are very grateful. The countries themselves are doing something differently by issuing these compacts, signing them at a head of state level, and then committing to creating these country platforms where, as this project is implemented, countries can get feedback directly from philanthropic and private commercial partners in the course of implementation. These are different ways of working that are difficult to implement across the board, and I think we in the philanthropic sector have to recognize that everyone's doing something that's different and hard and important, because what's at stake is the future of Africa's economy, a future for Africa's young people, and a future for the stability of our world. And we too have to behave differently to be productive partners here.
Raj, thank you so much. So Ajay, you heard Raj talk about the importance of philanthropic capital, especially when it comes to taking risks that the private sector can't. But obviously there isn't nearly enough philanthropic capital that's actually going to be able to ensure that Mission 300 achieves its goals. Just explain to us, and you guys have all touched on this already, how important the cross-sector collaboration is, right? From the private sector to governments to organizations like the Rockefeller Foundation.
Yeah. Look, I mean, if you step back from all of this, the only way development gets done, the only way jobs get created. And what is development? It's not a school or a railway or a road. That's just the work. It's the means to an end. The real end is to give people the dignity of the ability to earn and be constructive and productive in society. That's what we're all here for. Mm-hmm. The only way that works is with three things. Just bear with me for a minute. The first vertical is the basic foundations of enabling things to work. That's what governments do best. That's what the public part of banks like the African Development Bank and banks like the World Bank do well. IBRD, IDA in our case, we work with governments to help create the basic infrastructure. Then the second vertical is how do you then convert that into two things. One is better governance, And the second is regulatory policies and rules that enable the third vertical, which is the private sector, to become the job-generating engine. 80% of jobs in the world are created with small and medium enterprises and small shareholder farmers, not from large companies. They need to be able to be built for success, and that requires the right regulatory environment, but also the right access to capital. Those are the three verticals: the public, the knowledge and governance, and then the private. Here's the issue. For them to work well, you need to have access to capital, both priced but also concessional. There is not enough of that in government coffers. Their fiscal challenges are obvious to all. There is not enough of that in the multilateral banks. There's not enough of that in philanthropies. The only solution is involving the private sector in this game. It's their capital, their ingenuity, their technology, and their driven people who will help make this happen. So we are kind of in this together. And we have to find a way for the development banks and governments to work with the foundations and the private sector. That is the interlocking nature of what we're trying to get done. We have access to some concessional capital. IDA, which just had a very successful sort of replenishment, about 30% of IDA goes concessional or grant, as in basically no repayment, no interest. The rest of it goes concessional. So we have access, but so does Rockefeller, and so do many other foundations. Our request is, bring your shoulder to the wheel. Don't just talk about it. Come here and play. And Raj needs to be thanked by all of us for his foundation and his team being willing to step up. He called me up 4 days after the spring meeting. So I'll take a minute of your time. I had asked my colleagues, and Anna is sitting there, she runs our operations. I asked her, how many people has the World Bank connected to electricity in the past decade? And I got a number of 100 million. And I asked her, so what do you want to do by 2030? And so she went away with a look of shock on her face, then came back and said, how about 200 million? And I said, that's interesting. How about a little more? And she came back with 250. Now, 250 out of 600 in Africa was an exciting number. Then Akin shows up, and we talked, and he said, I'm in for 50. And I said, now 300 is a real number. Now we announce it, and both of us like deers in the headlight, saying, how the heck are we going to get this done? And then Raj shows up. And he shows up and says, 4 days after the announcement, I have a plan for you. And here's how I can help. And here's how I can bring philanthropic money to the table. You bring your capital, Akin brings his, I'll bring philanthropic money. Honestly, if Raj had not been the catalyst that day, we would have had an even more difficult time to take this forward. So thank you, Raj. Thank you very much. And I'm saying all this not just to thank one foundation. I'm saying all this to explain we're kind of all in it together. It's not about one of us. It's not about the other one. We're kind of in it together if we're going to make a difference to jobs for young people, and therefore to take advantage of this demographic boom that is Africa's availability today. But also, if we don't take advantage of this is going to be a real challenge for African leadership in the coming 2 decades. So now's the time to do something about it.
Yeah, this idea that we're all in it together is an important one and a great one to end on, because the trust and the confidence between the public and private sector is going to be key to Mission 300 success. So Dr. Adesina, with that note, I just want to get you to make some closing remarks for the audience.
Thank you very much, Zain Asher. I just wanted to address one issue that we haven't discussed, which is part of the agenda, which is access to clean cooking for women. Today, we have 1.2 billion women in Africa without access to clean cooking. And we lose 300,000 kids every single year that their mothers carry on their back because of lack of access to clean cooking, because of the secondary effect of smoke. We lose 300,000 women also every year. Why should anybody have to die just for trying to cook a decent meal that is taken for granted in other parts of the world? That is not acceptable. In good conscience, we just can't do that. And that's why a big part of what we're trying to do is to make sure that women in Africa can cook decently without having to have smoke, without their kids having to die because of that. And we had President Samia here. She's playing an incredible global leadership. She showed up for us in Paris together with President Macron. And we had a summit, a meeting together with International Energy Agency. And we said we needed to raise $4 billion a year. It's all it's going to take, $4 billion a year. And we at African Development Bank committed to $2 billion towards that. So we have to make sure that we give access to, because it causes deforestation. It causes loss of biodiversity. It's about life. You know, a lot of time we talk about energy transition. COP29 president, you are here. It's not just about energy transition. Already for women in Africa, they are transitioning life just to be able to cook. And so it's all about dignity as far as I am concerned. Africa must develop with dignity, with pride. Its women, its population must have access to clean cooking solutions. And I want to commend once again President of Tanzania for having a national strategy. You will see in all of the compacts as you join us that all these countries have committed to being able to have. Tanzania commits to 100% access to clean cooking solutions by 2030. Nigeria committed to that. Ghana is committed to that. So let's make sure that this aspect is done. And just to close, please, Raj said it all. The three of us are simply representing the hope and aspiration of the continent. Join us from bilaterals, from multilaterals, from private sector, from civil society. Join us from foundations to be able to do this. And the numbers that Ajay was talking about, how we got to 300 million, and your point about this is not the first time we're having a summit was different. These 300 million, we have a clear path of exactly how it is going to happen. And so the issue here is making sure that we hold ourselves accountable. We also built in that accountability system into the compact, where in each of the countries, we will have monitoring and evaluation. We also have the Africa Energy Regulatory Index that will allow us to be able to measure the progress that countries are making. So this is all about accountability, about transparency, about delivery, and also letting Africa develop with pride. You talk about jobs, Ajay talked about jobs, and Ajay is correct. But I want to say one thing about migration, because I watch that a lot, and DSG, you are here. And I'm very, very passionate about that particular issue. When we say Africans are migrating, look, even insects migrate. They move from where there's darkness to where there's light. And so if you want to tackle migration, make sure that Africa has 100% access to electricity. We'll do what Ajay says. They create jobs, we industrialize, we add value to everything that we have. So this summit that you are here from around the world to be, it's about how we unleash, unlock, propel Africa's potential to be able to be what it is. Not what it is, what it can be. And I'm sure that with power, Africa will more than be what it can be in the world and be a competitive and prosperous continent. Thank you for joining us on that mission. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adesina. Can we just give each of the panelists one last round of applause as we end this section? Thank you.